Okay, let's just dive right in. The source we're unpacking today is, well, it's frankly breathtaking. It's called the Book of Voices.
And you have to understand, this isn't some ancient historical text.
No, not at all. It's this incredible work, a kind of staged dialogue.
Yeah.
It puts 40 of history's greatest mystics all in the same room, talking to each other.
We're talking about Meister Eckhart, Rumi, Ramana Maharshi.
Simone Weil, Padmasambhava. I mean, the list just goes on. It pulls from Christian, Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, Taoist traditions, all of them.
All in one conversation.
So our mission today really is this ultimate thought experiment. What happens when these titans who lived centuries apart and, spoke in completely different philosophical languages, what happens when they're forced to confront each other's core truths?
Right.
Specifically on, well, the big three: self, practice, and love. Do they all just, find common ground and agree on everything?
And that's the absolute key takeaway for you right from the start. They don't. They don't just synthesize their beliefs into some tidy universal package.
So what do they do?
They achieve something much more profound, I think,
Yeah.
and much more useful. They find a shared language of paradox. So these huge contradictions like, do you need to work ferociously on a spiritual path, or do you just need to be still?
Yeah, the big ones.
Those don't cancel each other out in this dialogue. They become complementary. They're different tools for different people. So today we're going to focus on those moments of real tension and the surprising places where they all meet.
Okay, so in this fictional gathering, the conversation kicks off exactly where you'd expect. Right at the beginning.
The first question.
The first question: who am I?
Then boom. Immediately, the room just splits. The battle lines are drawn between the traditions that, want to dissolve the self and those who want to see the self as the highest reality.
Let's start with that first camp, the radical dissolution. You have Ramana Maharshi, and his whole teaching is self-inquiry, or atma-vichara. He tells you to just relentlessly trace that I thought back to its source. But when he does it, when he searches for himself, he says he finds, well, nothing.
And by nothing, he means that the small self, the ego, your life story, your personality, it's all just an illusion. It's built on a mistake.
Yeah.
The I that's looking can't be found as an object because it's the looking itself.
It's the camera, not something in the picture.
Exactly. The true self, for him, is just the ground of all being. It's unborn, undying.
But okay, if the self is just this illusion we need to get rid of, what about the mystics who see something really beautiful in that illusion? I'm thinking of Rumi and the Sufis. They argue that the decoration, the world, our bodies, the so-called illusion, has this immense divine beauty.
This is where Rumi just leans forward in the dialogue and changes everything. He says the absolute, or love as he would call it, went to all this trouble to forget itself, just so that the act of remembering would be, in his words, delicious beyond bearing.
I love that.
It's incredible, right? A wave has to feel what it's like to be a wave, to feel separate and alone before it can realize it was always the ocean. For Ramana, the goal is annihilation of the illusion. For Rumi, it's the celebration of it.
That's the difference between saying this world is a mistake to overcome and this world is God's greatest art installation.
Precisely. And this is where the jargon comes in, but it's important. The Buddhists, like Nagarjuna, talk about emptiness or shunyata, the absence of a separate, permanent self.
Right.
But then someone like Shankaracharya emphasizes fullness Brahman. The self is everything. And what's so crucial, and what they all start to agree on, is that at the end of the day, emptiness is form, and fullness is form.
Okay, hold on. Slow down on that one. How does an absence of self become the totality of self? That sounds like a complete contradiction.
It does. But the self isn't found as an object. It's recognized as the subject of everything.
Yes.
When that little separate I finally dissolves, what's left isn't a void. It's just total unobstructed awareness.
Right.
Everything.
I see.
And that's why Al-Hallaj, the Sufi martyr, could shout, I am the truth, and al-haq. That wasn't his ego talking. That was the experience of fullness that comes right after the little self dissolves. So Ramana's quiet inquiry and Al-Hallaj's passionate cry are, strangely, pointing at the exact same thing.
And they wrap this whole section up by agreeing that language just fails. You have Lao Tzu saying the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao.
And then, centuries later, Hildegard of Bingen basically finishes his sentence.
She says, the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon.
But, and this is the key part, without the finger, the moon remains unseen. Words are useless containers for the truth, but they're the only pointers we have.
So if the self is an illusion or it's already the total self, the next question just breaks the room in half. What are we supposed to do?
No, the 40 voices just split. You have the nothing camp and the everything camp.
Okay, let's start with nothing. This group believes if the self is always here, then the path has to be immediate recognition, not gradual work.
Krishnamurti is the loudest voice here. He's forceful. Truth is a pathless land. The second you create a method, a system, a guru...
You're just creating a delay, a prison.
A prison of effort, exactly.
Yeah.
The seeker is the sought. You don't walk a path to get to where you already are.
And Ramana backs him up on this. Just ask the question and the answer, which is the self reveals itself. There's no distance to travel. But this is where they get some ferocious resistance.
Oh, absolutely. That resistance comes roaring from the everything camp, and its main voice is George Gurdjieff.
Gurdjieff.
And he basically calls this idea of immediate recognition a kind of spiritual romanticism. He says bluntly that modern man is asleep. We're machines, run by buttons being pushed. And he challenges Ramana directly. He says, you talk about transcending the self. First, have a self to transcend.
Wow. He's saying most people don't even have a coherent self to begin with.
There's just a collection of warring impulses. So Gurdjieff insists that without conscious effort, a school, what he calls intentional suffering, you just stay a machine. Yeah. You're not even capable of self-inquiry. It sounds exhausting.
It does. But he's saying it's necessary for most of us.
For those of us who are still stuck in the machinery of pain, as he puts it, where our habits run everything,
Yeah.
the path of action, of disciplined work, is the only way to shift from being a machine to being a conscious human.
So how do you bridge that gap? The pathless path versus the path of ferocious work?
The book finds this beautiful middle ground with the Zen master Dogen.
With Zazen.
Yes, his practice of just sitting. Dogen taught that the practice is the enlightenment. It's not a means to an end. The act of sitting right now is enlightenment manifesting itself.
You don't sit to get enlightened.
You sit as enlightenment. The end is the means.
But for you, the listener, that still feels like a huge gamble, right? How do you know if you're the person who can just recognize it immediately, or if you're the person who needs Gurdjieff's boot camp?
And that's Shankaracharya's vital contribution here. He talks about the adhikaris, the student's capacity. He says the right path depends entirely on who's asking. Some people are ready for immediate recognition. For them, any system is a waste of time.
And for others?
For others, they need the gradual path of effort and work. And he warns that giving the wrong path to the wrong student is a disaster. It's either dangerous or it's just a long, unnecessary delay.
So practice isn't about building a new self or earning something.
No.
It's about figuring out which tools you need to remove the obstacles that are already there.
That's it, exactly. They all agree the truth is always present. Practice is just. It's cloud removal. You're removing the habits, the false ideas that are blocking the sun that's already shining.
Okay, this is where things get really intense. If all these paths lead to this realization that all is one, that everything is Brahman, what happens when you throw real-world suffering into the mix? Nanak asks this devastating question. If a robber is ultimately robbing himself because all is her, one, why does cruelty feel so profoundly, deeply wrong? Why does it demand a response?
This is the absolute core tension. And again, the room splits. You get the absolute view versus the relative view.
The Paramarthika and the Vyavaharika.
Yes. Nisargadatta Maharaj argues from that absolute standpoint. From pure consciousness, there is no right or wrong, no ethics. Those are just categories that belong to the illusion of separation.
Which sounds, that sounds incredibly cold and, frankly, dangerous.
And Catherine of Siena and Simone Weil just erupt. They respond with this righteous fire. Catherine says that in the real world, the relative world, suffering is real in the only way that matters. It hurt.
You can't just explain it away.
For the person feeling the pain, it is not an illusion, and ignoring it is morally bankrupt.
Simone Weil really pushes this. She talks about what she calls affliction. Suffering so intense, it basically reduces a person to a thing. It strips away their humanity. And her challenge is just piercing. What stops the enlightened person from becoming a monster if all is permitted?
And the way they converge on this is one of the most powerful moments in the whole book. The masters basically say the question is based on a misunderstanding.
How so?
Ramana and the Buddha both agree. A truly realized person cannot commit violence. It's not that they follow a rule. It's that the distinction between me and you has experientially collapsed.
So hurting someone else literally feels like hurting yourself.
Exactly. It's not a concept anymore. It's a felt reality. Their ethics are an outgrowth of their awareness, not a code they follow.
But that doesn't just mean sitting back and doing nothing.
Not at all. This is where Padmasambhava argues for what he calls fierce love. Sometimes love has to resist. This is the whole idea of the Bodhisattva vow. You postpone your own final liberation to serve and protect others.
The warrior's way.
the warrior's way. Using force without anger to protect the innocent, that is also a radical act of love.
And then to connect that suffering right back to the divine, you have Julian of Norwich.
She finds the ultimate union right there, in the pain. Her insight is that the wound is the healing. The suffering itself is the doorway, which mirrors Al-Hallaj on the cross, realizing his pain was God's pain, the absolute experiencing what it means to be finite. The suffering is real, but it becomes the very vessel for realizing the divine.
So after all of this philosophical wrestling, self, no self, path, no path, the entire conversation it seems to circle back to one thing that holds it all together.
Love.
Love.
And it's Rumi who just makes his undeniable declaration. He says, love isn't a feeling, it's not a sentiment. It is the substance of the universe. It's the force that makes existence possible.
But even here in this place of unity, there are these two very different faces of love. You have the devotional, the bhakti path. You have Mirabai.
Wild, messy, heartbroken Mirabai.
Yeah.
She insists that for love to work, you need two. You need the lover and the beloved Krishna. That separation is what allows for the divine play, the Leela. And more importantly, it's what allows for the ecstasy of union after the agony of longing.
Her path is all passion and relationship.
It's personal. It's erotic. It's immediate.
And then you contrast that with someone like Meister Eckhart, the German mystic. Pure jnana, pure knowledge.
He draws this razor-sharp intellectual line. He says you have to distinguish between God, the being who loves and suffers and interacts with you, and the Godhead, the silent, unmoving, undifferentiated ground that God arises from.
And for him, the highest act isn't prayer.
No, it's the opposite. It's absolute detachment. He says the soul at its peak breaks through even God, breaks through that personal relationship to unite with the silent Godhead. It's an act of radical stillness, no clinging.
So how on earth do you hold both of those? The intense personal longing of Mirabai for Krishna and the absolute impersonal stillness of Eckhart's Godhead.
Because that paradox is the ultimate reality of love. The mystics finally see that love is, at the same time, the impersonal absolute that Ramana talks about, Satchidananda, being consciousness bliss. And it is the agonizing, intensely personal relationship that someone like Teresa of Avila experiences. Love is the container big enough to hold both Mirabai's ecstatic scream and Eckhart's profound silence.
So after all this, what was the result? Did this council succeed or fail?
Hafez, the poet, he sums it up perfectly. He says the whole conversation was completely useless and utterly necessary.
The dance was the point.
The dance was the point. They found their unity not in a shared answer, but in a shared reverence for the paradox itself.
So the final convergence wasn't about finding one truth.
No, it was about developing the discernment, which is a word the Buddha uses a lot, to hold all the contradictions at once. Path and no path, one and many, action and stillness. The real teaching is just about recognizing what is always, always already here.
And so this deep dive, it really leaves us with Simone Weil's most vulnerable question. It's the one that apparently broke the assembly's silence, and it's the one that I think speaks most to anyone listening to this today. For the person who longs and seeks but just finds silence, no ecstasy, no visions, no clear answers, is their path just their honest longing? Is that enough?
And Rumi's final, incredibly tender answer is what we have to leave you with. He says, ask me again on the other side.
Wow.
But then he adds, for right now, until then, he assures you, your pain, your doubt, your longing, that the love manifesting as longing, the wound is the place where the light enters. And until we get to the other side, that truth, that's the whole wisdom.